Metro on 101.9 WDET-FM. I am Tia Graham, and this week in the co-hosting chair is historian and journalist Ken Coleman. Ken, it's a Thursday. You've been here all week rocking with us.
Absolutely.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Tia, you make me feel at home, and WDET does as well.
Yay! So, before we get to some history, today on the program, tax capture allows Detroit to divert some of its public tax dollars toward the development of the city's downtown area. But after doing that for decades, some experts believe that tax capture is no longer helping the city. We'll hear a conversation from a researcher about why he thinks that's the case. But first, Ken has some history facts about this day in Detroit. I love this.
Absolutely. On this date, October the 3rd, 1907. We're going way back in the time. 1907, the Detroit Tigers won their first World Series championship by defeating the Chicago Cubs in 5 games.
On October 3rd.
On October 3rd, 1907. Also, and I think you'll really dig this one, Tia.
Yeah.
In 1975, October 3rd, 1975, a popular recording artist, India Arie, was born. She was actually born, India Arie, in Denver, Colorado. But she is the daughter of a favorite Detroit son. Her dad is named Ralph Simpson. And he was a very popular, very noted basketball player, both at Pershing High School here in Detroit, your MSU, Michigan State University. Absolutely. And also played in the NBA for several teams, including the Detroit Pistons.
That's amazing.
So India Arie born on this day in 1975. And then finally, 1 year later in 1976, the late, great Marvin Gaye performed at the London Palladium. Now, elements of that concert, and that concert was recorded live, were released in an album the following year. And one of the big hits from that London Palladium concert was the tune, the infectious tune, Got to Give It Up.
Okay, I had to get off the wall, y'all.
Yeah, get off the wall. Oh. So a few important moments in Detroit history.
I love Got to Give It Up. I listen to it when I'm cleaning. I'm listening to it when I'm working out. I love that song.
Energy.
It's so much energy, and it's so Detroit, and I love it so very much. Ken, thank you so much. I can't wait to talk to you tomorrow about history of October 4th in Detroit. But getting into our first segment of the day, tests. They don't tell us everything we need to know, but they can definitely be useful in assessing how students are learning and whether we need to intervene to change that process. Now, there's a growing chorus of experts and state leaders who think it's time we do that in Michigan. That's why last week the State House passed 2 bills that aim to improve reading instruction. They specifically would help schools identify and teach students with dyslexia or other reading difficulties. What's more, they would require that public schools and teacher programs emphasize phonics to teach children to read. All of that could be really important because Michigan students are not reading well. 2024 M-STEP scores demonstrated that 60% of third graders failed the state reading test, and the state ranks 43rd in the country for fourth grade reading, according to 2022 test assessments. So, what could the impact of these bills have on Michigan children if they are passed, and why are they important, and is there a better way to teach kids to read? To discuss all this now, we have American Public Media reporter Chris Peck here, alongside reporter Emily Hanford. Chris investigated U.S. reading curriculum and podcast Sold a Story. Chris, welcome to the Metro. It's Chris Peak, actually. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So talk to us about phonics, the method that we had used to teach children in Michigan to read. For those who don't know and don't understand what it is, can you tell us about it?
Yeah. So there's been a lot of debate going back even centuries about how we actually teach kids to read. Do we start at the level of letters and words, kind of that phonics, or do we do something a little bit going from the level of stories and the meaning, the kind of bigger picture? And so for a long time, this debate was very abstract. We didn't really know the answer. There were 2 camps. But in the 1960s and 70s, there really started to be a lot of research coming out of psychology and cognitive science that gave us an answer. And it said that to become a good reader, you need to have phonics. Reading is kind of an unnatural act. We as humanity have not been doing it for very long, so our minds are not evolutionarily trained to be able to just pick up a text and read it. It's not like speaking, where you come out of the womb just babbling, you're hearing your parents talk, and you just slowly start picking up the language without anyone really teaching you. But reading is different, and for almost everyone, and especially for this group of kids who struggle with reading, they need to be taught phonics, and that's been missing. So I had this podcast, Sold a Story, that I co-reported with Emily Hanford, that we looked at and found that there'd been this other method of teaching reading that's really taken over, even though there had been so much research for the last 50, 60 years showing that phonics is the way. They gave these kind of other strategies that said you don't really need to sound out words because you have these other things you can do.
And if you can, go into some of the other things they can do. And if it was a good method, why did the state shift away from it? So what were some of the other methods that you were saying, that you were just referring to, that would be away from phonics? And then if phonics was a good method, why did the state shift away?
Yeah. So the other method is a little bit of a shortcut. So you come to a word you don't know, and you're struggling to figure out what it means. And so this other method said, why don't you look at the first letter, look at the picture in the storybook, and just guess what it might be. Figure out what would make sense there, which seems like an okay strategy. Maybe if you're just totally stuck, you have no clue what letters are on the page. But if you're doing that as you're going through a text, trying to read it, you're stopping at every single word, trying to guess, looking at the pictures, you're guessing the wrong word, then the text makes no sense. It's not an efficient system. So it might work once you get lucky, but it's not going to be the way that you want kids to be reading, just stumbling their way through a text, trying to figure it out. So phonics, even though it takes a little bit longer to actually figure out this complicated code that we have in our written system, ends up being much more efficient in the long run. But because it's a little bit tedious to teach for teachers, you kind of have to go through the letters and the alphabet, it fell out of fashion. And these other strategies were kind of seen as a quick shortcut. The whole curriculum changed, and so a lot of schools started using these books that really encouraged this guessing, to help kids look at the picture, and that took off. We investigated. There's one publishing company that became some of the most popular curriculum in the United States. We're selling this method, and a lot of teachers loved it, and it totally took off.
You know, it's really interesting when we think about this. I mean, there's a whole generation or two of people, Americans, who have grown up. A lot of generations of people, but there's lots of folks that have grown up hooked on phonics. Certainly school-age children, and now a lot of them are probably educators. Yet, at least today, and I'm wondering too if you could speak to this, or if any of the research speaks to this, the challenges that the pandemic caused us. We know that children are testing very poorly in reading in far too many cases. What are the other causes to this besides the phasing out of phonics?
Sure, yeah, there's a ton of causes. So it's not just what's in the curriculum, but going back for a long, long time, we've known that the links between poverty that a kid is growing up in, that their schools, neighborhood, what's around that, those are huge factors. Even things like lead paint in their houses. There's so many other environmental causes, whether they are able to show up to school. That is a huge factor. Certainly the amount of time that kids were in school during the pandemic, when a lot of kids were staying home, maybe they missed their Zoom session. Even learning over Zoom is kind of hard if everyone's wearing masks, or being able to see the teacher's mouth. You want to be able to see, what does my mouth look like when I say TH? What does that actually end up looking like to sound out? So there's so many difficulties that kids are facing. What we were focused on is some of those problems are seen as so intractable. How do we actually solve poverty overnight? That's such a hard issue. But getting kids the right instruction in phonics is something that teachers are already teaching us. Why don't we just do it the right way? So it's not the only fix, but it's something that is a little bit of an easier lift based on all this research that we know.
If you're just joining us, we're chatting about the way we teach Michigan children to read and why that might be changing in the state. And right now, Chris is chatting with myself as well as Ken Coleman. Chris, for adults who weren't taught phonics, is it too late? I know for a fact for myself that wasn't part of the main curriculum for reading when I was growing up. So Ken's talking about talking about me, a part of that generation of folk who didn't. I remember my older siblings talking about phonics and hooked on phonics and those things, but it just wasn't presented to me in that way, and I wasn't taught that way. So for adults who didn't learn that way and learn phonics, can it be corrected, or can they learn?
They definitely can learn. It is harder for sure. Our brains are so malleable early on, and there's a lot of research showing third grade is almost a cutoff. Wow. After third grade, a lot of the instruction flips, and it becomes not teaching kids to read, but you're reading to figure out all the things you need to learn. So a lot of those kids can get left behind, but that's not to say it's impossible. There are definitely ways to improve this. We even in the podcast interview one person who was much later in life, in his 50s, I think, who ends up going to an adult tutoring center and learning to read. And he had used all these strategies this is kind of the ironic part, all those strategies that were being taught to kids are the things that illiterate people, kids who are really struggling with reading, do anyway, because they can't figure out the text. And so they're going and guessing and looking at the picture. And he talked about these are the strategies I would do. I would say, okay, this is what the picture is in here. I know this M means something, and let me just guess what the word is. So that was the ironic part of this, is that we're teaching kids the habits of struggling readers.
Yeah. We're talking to Chris Peak here on the Metro this morning. Chris, let's go and talk about the politics of this, if you will. Talk to us about these bills that have been passed by the State House. What do they do, and how can they help improve reading abilities among students in Michigan?
Yeah, so there's two main bills that have gone through the legislature. I think they're still awaiting the governor's signature. And Michigan's joining. I think there's almost 40 states now that have legislation about reading instruction just in the last couple of years. So the main bill would get schools to use the science of reading, all this research that we've known from the last 50, 60 years, as the basis for their instruction. From now on, you're going to have to be using evidence-based methods when you're teaching. You can't do any of those discredited strategies of looking at the pictures, skipping over words, guessing as you're going through the text. You need to actually teach kids these foundational skills of phonics, making sure that they can read through a text fluently, teach them vocabulary, comprehension, all those things. That needs to be part of your instruction now. And there's a particular focus on the kids who are struggling, who are not getting it. So there's going to be testing for dyslexia and other learning disabilities, other reading difficulties, to make sure that you're identifying those kids early, that they're not going to become the adults who are struggling through text, but hopefully by first grade, by kindergarten, you'll be able to help them get them the help that they need. And those interventions and tutoring programs need to really be based in research. And then the other bill would focus on teacher preparation programs, those teachers of tomorrow, to make sure that they know about all this, about the science of reading, about what dyslexia looks like and how it manifests, and make sure that they're prepared before they enter the classroom.
Yeah. One other question for Michigan parents, parents who are listening today. How can they find out about what curriculum is taught to their kids?
This is a little bit hard. We had a struggle with this doing the podcast. It's difficult to know. And a lot of schools even do their own thing. So the district doesn't even have one curriculum. But I think when they go in for a report card night or parent-teacher conferences, they can just ask, what are you using? There's a lot of different guides online now that help parents and teachers figure out, is this curriculum up to snuff? And they can even just ask, how are you teaching phonics? How are you teaching some of these other key skills that we know kids need to know, like vocabulary or fluency? So it's just a matter of asking, and there are so many people who care really passionately about this issue. Teachers who are just coming out of these teacher prep programs, or old veteran teacher who'd been doing phonics since the 1990s or before. People care about this issue, so find the parents, because there's a lot of different activism around this issue.
Chris Peck is an reporter for American Public Media. Chris investigated U.S. reading curriculum in the podcast Sewed a Story. Chris, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you.
It's It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. Really enjoyed the last conversation we just had with Chris and Ken Coleman, of course. And Ken, we have some things that are shaking up here. Of course, we're going to get to weather, but I have to jump down and talk about the Tigers because the Tigers beat the Houston Astros 5-2 in Game 2. You said that your son was jumping up and down when you picked him up. He was so excited.
He was. He wore a Spencer Torkerton jersey, Detroit, one of the hot Detroit Tigers. He wore it to school yesterday, and by the time we got home, the ball game was on. But as you pointed out, the Tigers beat the Houston Astros 5-2 in Game 2 of the American League Wild Card Series. What that means is that the Tigers move on, and they will begin to play the Cleveland Guardians. They're the Guardians now. Begin to play them next week. The score was tied. It was dramatic. The score was tied at 2 runs apiece late in the game when Detroit manager A.J. Hinch sent in pinch hitter Andy Ibanez. And Ibanez hit a 3-run double that gave the Tigers the overwhelming lead. And as I pointed out, the Tigers will start the second round of the American League wild card playoffs, or this will be the divisional playoffs. They'll start that in Cleveland on Saturday.
Yep, Game 3 of the ALDS will be at Comerica Park next Wednesday. Yep. Really cool that I found that I was searching through that this will be the first time in almost 100 years that there would be an NFL Lions playoff game played in Detroit and a Tigers baseball game played in Detroit. Almost 100 years since that's happened.
Now you jumped me on that history.
I've been scrolling. I couldn't help it. Everyone's just like so excited about the Tigers right now. So we're just throwing out facts and history and learning about our local team. I'm so excited right now. So honestly,
this has got to be Sports City, USA. Right?
It has to be right now. We're America's city right now.
Right,
okay.
That's
Coming up, we'll hear the case for why Detroit should stop diverting some of its public tax dollars to go towards developing its downtown. It's coming up next. It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I am Tia Graham here with journalist and historian Ken Coleman.
Great to be here, Tia.
Of course.
Well, on to our next segment. During the 1970s, Detroit was starting to decline. The decline was marked by middle-class flight, a shrinking tax base, and white suburban flight that was often antagonistic to Detroit, which was majority black at that time. As a result, the loss of revenue, blight, and neglect began creeping into the city. So in the 1970s, then Detroit Mayor Coleman Young went to Lansing to advocate for a downtown development authority, an organization that would capture some tax money for private entities that would have otherwise gone to schools and recreation centers and diverted a lot of that money to downtown projects as opposed to inner city projects. Now, some residents and experts believe that Detroit no longer needs to capture those tax dollars that were going downtown in a downtown that's been redeveloped in a very progressive way. A new report by the Citizens Research Council of Michigan is advocating for phasing out the practice of the tax capture in Detroit that puts millions of tax dollars toward public services. And so our great producer, Sam Corey, recently spoke with the Research Council's president, Eric Lofer, about why he thinks tax capture is no longer a good idea in Detroit. They began by discussing how Downtown Detroit Development Authority operates.
So let's just start here. What is the Downtown Development Authority and how does it operate?
All right. So many years ago, back in the 1970s, Detroit, we know now, was at the early stages of its decline, starting to lose population, businesses. Things were pretty dour downtown. And then Mayor Coleman Young went to the legislature and asked for two things. One was tax abatements, the ability to use tax incentives to attract businesses to the city.
Yep.
And the other is what we call a downtown development authority. And the basic idea, the downtown area, the central business district, is clearly part of Detroit's tax base, but it's also part of the tax base for Wayne County and the Detroit school system, the Wayne County Intermediate School System, many different taxing jurisdictions.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is, instead of all those entities receiving the tax benefit,
Yep.
the special authority would be created, and all of the growth from the economic development activity, all of the growth that's resulting from that would be captured. And we put air quotes around that term captured.
Yeah, it is a strange phrasing, but it's used all the time.
Yeah.
What essentially it's doing is the point was to attract businesses to the downtown area.
If we were to start one today, we would tell all those taxing jurisdictions, the existing tax base is yours. So all the taxes you levy on that existing tax base in downtown Detroit is yours. But all of the growth, because we're going to start doing these economic activities to bring these businesses in, it's going to make the property value appreciate more. And so from tomorrow on, we get to capture that growth, but you get everything that exists as of today.
So let me ask you a question. A business moves in after 1975 and they develop the business and then they open. Where, I guess, in the process is the capture coming from?
All of the business owners, all the property owners downtown still pay the same taxes.
Okay.
They don't know the difference.
Okay.
They write their check and you get the itemized bill that says this much is going to the city and to the county and so on. They pay their taxes just like the rest of us. But it's what happens in the back end that once the city receives that, it's taking a cut and sending it to the Downtown Development Authority, saying they know how much the tax base has grown since that beginning date, and therefore how much of the tax rate applied to that tax base goes to the DDA and how much goes to the city, to the county. And
that beginning date was in the 70s when the Downtown Development Authority was created for Detroit.
1978.
So as the taxes have gone up because the value of the land is higher, a lot of those taxes are going to the Downtown Development Authority, not to public schools or essentially city government services.
Yeah, the city, the general fund, Wayne County's general fund, Wayne County's park tax, the school tax, all of those jurisdictions still have a 1977 tax base.
I just want to highlight this because that is wild. I mean, it's 2024.
Right.
That is that's about 50 years.
47 years.
47 years of tax capture. So there's, hundreds of millions of dollars that would be going to things like schools, fire, police, public health entities, like those kinds of things, parks, what have you, that has not gone into it because of the utilization of the DDA, of the Downtown Development Authority. If you're just joining us, my name is Sam Coy, and I'm speaking with Eric Lufer, the president of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan, about changing how the city of Detroit taxes businesses that operate in downtown Detroit. Eric, I guess I'm wondering, how much money would Detroit be getting? How much money would be going to, again, public schools, a lot of different public agencies, if businesses in downtown were taxed without that tax capture, if that tax capture didn't exist?
Right. So again, it's a bit of the but for what would happen. And it cannot happen tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
There's debt outstanding that suggests the DDA has to go on for a while. But it's
because the DDA, to be clear, is paying off some of that debt. Right. It's paying off some of Detroit's debt.
It has pledged the captured taxes to repay the debt.
Mm-hmm.
So the bond world would look very, especially 10 years removed from bankruptcy, what are you doing? You can't cheat the bondholders.
Mm-hmm.
It would not play well. So, having said all that, it would be about a $40 million windfall for the city if you could hit the reset button and that money, instead of going to the authority, starts going to the city and the county and everyone else.
So let's talk about your solutions that you had in this report. You want to phase out tax capture by having the Downtown Development Authority pay off Detroit's debt first. Is that right?
Right. So again, we can't do anything as long as the debt's outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
So it needs to be, and it is, I'm happy to report, a priority for the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, the DEGC.
Which runs the DDA.
Right, yeah. They're the administrative arm of the DDA. It is a priority of theirs to retire the debt. Now, what has happened over that 47 years, they started off with a plan. That's part of the law. You have to create a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And it said, we're going to invest, and it should be about 30 years to issue that bond and repay that. But then they amended it, and they stretched the time out. And they amended it 30 times.
Wow. Explain one thing for me, because this is one thing I'm getting a little confused on, is if it's not any cheaper for the businesses, right? If they're not being subsidized at all, then why would they care, or do they care? Do the businesses care at all if there's this downtown development authority and the tax capture happening, or are they pretty agnostic to this?
Well, the benefit of having the economic development activity, we have more businesses, more buildings occupied downtown, more traffic coming to downtown, more parking, more people riding the bus downtown. So now if you're an owner of that building, you're able to pull in a restaurant to be on that first floor.
Yeah. You're
able to have a shop. You buy chips or soda or whatever. So economic activity breeds economic activity.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good things that are happened because of this. But at some point, I did as part of my research, I said, what's the point here, right? In 1976, when we enacted that state law, we said that the property tax base wasn't growing in a way to support the government services that we want. So what if there is some short-term pain allowing your tax revenue to be captured for long-term gain? But that short-term is turned into long-term, and at some point it just feels like we're doing economic development to pay for economic development.
And it's like, we already got it. We don't need it anymore.
At some point, the governments have to benefit so we can pay for police and fire and fix the neighborhoods and support people wanting to be in Detroit and owning their homes and doing all the things. Downtown is supposed to support the rest of the city.
That was producer Sam Corey speaking with Eric Lofer, president of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan, about why Detroit should phase out its use of tax capture.
Coming up, we'll chat with freelancer Sam Robinson about young voters and what's happening with 2 legacy newspapers in the city of Detroit. You all stay right there. It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham here with journalist and historian Ken Coleman. Ken.
Great to be here, Tia. Vice presidential candidates J.D. Vance and Tim Walz were met on stage earlier this week on Tuesday of their only scheduled debate of the 2024 election. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump took the stage in September, and they're not likely to meet again for another debate. With that, we're only 33 days away from the election, and absentee voting has already started in Michigan. To be sure, Decision 2024 is already in voters' hands. To discuss what young people are thinking about during this election and the importance of media in this space, we're joined by freelance reporter Sam Robinson. Sam, welcome to the Metro.
What's going on, everybody?
All right.
Welcome back.
What up, though?
I know.
Not too much, man. I'm chilling for real.
No, I follow you on X, and you're doing a lot.
What's X?
Well, right. Tell me about it. No, let's not get into that. Let's stay focused. Let me ask you the first question, my friend. What are the sentiments right now? With voters and what seems to be the biggest takeaway 33 days away from Election Day?
Yeah, did you guys watch that CNN focus group with the undecided voters?
I saw some snippets.
If you're an undecided voter having to watch the vice presidential debate to make your decision, I don't know what to tell you at this point. I think folks are ready to vote. You know, if you had asked me last month that about this time Kamala had all this momentum, has it really vaporized? I think you're starting to get that question from Beltway media is like, oh, is her, moment sort of descending? I don't think so. I told Jer on Daily Detroit, I'll say it to you guys too.
Sure.
There's no movement here. It's not Obama in 08. We already had our first black president. The historicness of the first South Asian African-American woman president has sort of been taken away because she's already in the White House as vice president. Yeah. So it's like that whole, the people who are voters, especially black women, especially, women that are members of sororities, right. Women who are really care about reproductive rights and, democratic action issues. Yeah, you're going to go vote for Kamala. You're probably going to go vote for Joe Biden. So, Kamala, I don't know if she's going to sort of see a wave that we saw over the last sort of 50 days. But I don't know if it's going to matter. Does she need a movement to win the election? No, I don't think so. No, I don't think Joe Biden had any other movement other than the anti-Trump sentiment that I think people still feel. I don't think it is as, felt as in 2020, just because Trump isn't the current president. We are not in the midst of a global pandemic. But, both sides, especially in Michigan, both campaigns right now believe they're going to win. The Trump campaign folks that I talk to every day, the Biden-Harris campaign folks that I talk to every day, they both think they're going to win.
Will the deciding demographic be young voters? And if it is, yes or no? And then speak to us about how young people are feeling. And what I mean by that is 20-somethings, 30-somethings.
Right. Will young people be the decider? I'm not sure. Will they, will anything change up to, there's 30-some days until the election? Is anything going to change out of the Trump camp or the Harris camp? No. The biggest issue, we talk about how much policy isn't really a part of this election cycle, but the most important policy to sort of my generation of folks has been foreign policy and what she's going to say or do differently than President Biden on the war in Gaza. That is in a lot of people's minds, especially here in Detroit.
Yeah, that was literally one of my questions to you, is about the policies and the issues and what's important to young voters, younger than us, as well as around our age as well. So what are some of the policies and issues that are important right now that you're seeing other than the one you just talked about?
Yeah, I think choice, reproductive health is the issue. I think in 2022, you saw Prop 3 here in Michigan, reproductive freedom for all, really boosted the Democratic candidates. I think that issue, while Republicans are addressing it, on the debate stage on Tuesday night, you heard from J.D. Vance say, I think Republicans have sort of misstepped on this issue and we need to, he said the American people don't trust Republicans on the issue of reproductive health and abortion. Now you have a Democratic candidate willing to actually say the word abortion, which Joe Catholic Biden was not willing to. Kamala Harris is going to be a champion on women's issues. She is a woman.
Yeah, exactly.
She's also a woman of color.
Yeah. So it matters. It has a little bit more weight there for her, and especially for her to say it out loud. But right now, if you're joining us, we're chatting with Sam Robinson, a freelance reporter, and he's chatting with us about the election, young voters, and local media's role in it. So we do have history here. We have some information here. We were talking a little bit beforehand, Sam, about the movement happening with the Freep as well as the Detroit News. And you talked a little bit about that beforehand, of course. So can you give us just a little bit of background about that movement there and what it means for the landscape of local media here in Detroit?
So both newsrooms were in the same building. R.I.P. Maru also out of the Federal Reserve building. Yeah. The last time I was in there, it was not great. But Free Press and News, they're going to move. They both expected, to my understanding, to be able to stay in there for a several number of months. That was longer than even a year, I think, 14 or 16 months I saw.
After the expiration of the lease?
Of the lease, And they didn't. Some people could frame it as Dan Gilbert is kicking the Free Press and the News out of the
I was going to ask that question.
He said at Crane's Homecoming, I tweeted that, he said at Crane's Homecoming that his greatest fear was being stuck on the Free Press on a deserted island with the Free Press. That was his greatest fear being stuck on a deserted island with the Detroit Free Press, said Dan Gilbert. Dan Gilbert, it's probably a good thing. Simon Schuster, shout out to Simon, Bridge, Michigan. He, very studiously pointed out it's probably a good thing that the Free Press and the News can now operate outside of the building of the most powerful man in the city of Detroit. Probably a good thing. What's not a good thing is if you're really looking forward to the News and the Free Press being around for another 1,000 years, their joint operating agreement ends next year. And people that know, I don't, because I, was in Saginaw, Michigan so more than I do, Ken.
I'm old enough to remember
the joint operating agreement is a big deal, and you can speak to that more than I can.
There used to be a time, y'all, when both outlets worked in different buildings down the street from each other. They came together in the late 80s under the joint operating agreement, and it has been the lay of the land for a couple of generations now.
So, Ken, since you have this background and this history and this knowledge, what do you see happening with this new change and this landscape change that we're going to see?
Well, I've been one of these people who I've been reporting off and on for more than 30 years now, and we've looked at the circulation decline at the legacy dailies, both of them. One far more aggressive than the other. And I've been predicting for a couple of decades a one newspaper town. That may happen as a result of all this. The reality is many people, we're getting our news on the phone, some from those legacy daily papers, but a lot from nonprofit news organizations. Yes. I write for Michigan Advance, a nonprofit news organization. There are several great other outlets out there that do the same thing. People are getting news in alternative ways, and that has taken out the market share of the Detroit News and Detroit Free Press.
Wow.
It's a sad thing for me. I don't like that because too many people are getting their news from bold font and bars, Instagram pictures. Yeah. We do, man, oh man, we need news, man. We need
really
it.
Do.
And
Real
we need
right?
thoughtful news too. We need news rooted in community and that are, relevant and to the issues that are going on. I said on my Twitter the other day, I said this account is going to start doing media criticism soon, and I'll do it right here for you guys first. No, and I told this right to the opinion editor. It was a shame that we had the ADL, CNN, Jake Tapper, for a week long, days long, sort of back and forth between Dana Nessel and Rashida Tlaib over whether Rashida's summarization of Dana Nessel charging several protesters at U of M was sort of biased. Dana Nessel felt as if the charge was anti-Semitic. There was a claim that was sort of muddled up, and it turned into a 3-day national story. Neither newspaper, and the whole story started off from Henry Payne's Detroit News cartoon.
The cartoon.
Neither paper, any commentary on either opinion section, none. That's not great, guys. Come on.
There was a declaration, I think, from the News's editor that. It wasn't me. It wasn't us.
Yeah, I mean, Gary said, he didn't feel like it was racist, but we didn't print it because it was lacking of sensitivity. It was lacking sensitivity. Death and killing isn't really funny, Henry Payne. I don't think you need to be it's not controversial to say that. But, we had a 3-day national episode that all these Beltway publications were getting the clicks on that the News and the Free Press could have got the clicks on themselves, and we could have had that conversation in our own community.
So,
we didn't have it.
30 seconds or less to get you in here. You're a young journalist under 30. You have been on the ground. You've been working within the legacy medias and outside of them now. Tell me, going forward, what do you want to see as a young journalist with the legacy media, but just in general with media in the city of Detroit? 30 seconds less.
I want to see more black people in positions of power, and I want to see more young people empowered to do actual interesting work. Work with relevant voices, and be supported, financially, resources. It takes money to do really good journalism. It takes time to do really good journalism. Let's not half-ass it.
All righty, then. Sam Robinson.
Keeping it real.
Is keeping it real. He's a freelance reporter, and he'll be reporting all election season and beyond. Sam, thank you so much for coming back to the Metro and keeping it real as always.
Thank you, guys. I love both of you guys.
Yay.
Thank you, brother.
on 101.9 WDET FM. Coming up, we will have a conversation with representatives from the Friends of Rouge Park to talk about an upcoming festival this weekend. You all stay right there. It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham here with journalist and historian Ken Coleman.
Good morning.
Good morning indeed. Now, jumping into our last conversation of the day, we often talk about downtown Detroit and all of its events, and we often look at what's happening in Midtown and News Center, but what is happening in the neighborhoods? What's going on in Detroit's parks? A lot, always a lot. Coming up this Saturday in Detroit is Detroit's Parks Coalition's Freedom Arts Festival series, the Rouge Park Buffalo Soldiers and Blues Freedom Festival. That is happening this Saturday. Super excited to talk about that. Joining us on the show now to chat more about the festival and the changes to leadership, actually, that we're going to be seeing within the Friends of Rouge Park, we have Alex Allen, the program director for Friends of Rouge Park. I know you just told me your nickname, and we're going to get to the nickname. Okay, just want to make sure we get the real name out there.
Okay.
And then we have
the radical.
Yes, and then we have Antonio Cosme. He is the land stewardship manager for Friends of Rouge Park. Antonio and Alex, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having us.
Hey.
How you doing?
So, Alex, what's your nickname?
Lex.
Lex.
Yeah.
Got you.
I love it.
I know. I got you. Want to make sure we get this right. So we're just jumping into the things. How long has the Rouge Park Buffalo Soldiers and Blues Freedom Festival been happening? We're going to start with you, Lex.
So it's been going on for a couple of years now. I'll say this will be my first year actually coordinating this event.
Cool.
When I first came on as program director last year, Buffalo Soldiers Fest was actually the first event that I assisted in facilitating. So this is my first time actually curating it from start to finish.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to be able to do this. Love being able to bring awareness to the Buffalo Soldiers in the park. So it's going to be really fun.
And we talk about the awareness of the Buffalo Soldiers. If you can, give us a little bit of the information there about the Buffalo Soldiers and the importance of remembering who they were.
Yeah. So the Buffalo Soldiers, they were a group of black soldiers that were assembled after the Civil War. They got their name Buffalo Soldiers from a lot of the Native American tribes that they encountered due to their tenacious fighting style. And so once they kind of went out of being in service for the military, the country really looked to them to protect a lot of the parks across America. So we have our own set of Buffalo Soldiers right there on Joy and Losser.
That is so cool. So why does the Detroit Parks Coalition and Friends of Rouge Park, why are they so invested in sharing this particular story? And we're going to stay with Lex, and then we're going to bring Antonio into the conversation. So Lex, why is it so important that you all continue to share? I know you just talked a little bit about it, but you're spreading this joy and this information here throughout the city of Detroit for so many generations to learn about the Buffalo Soldiers. And especially for me, I didn't know anything about the Buffalo Soldiers. So why is it important to share this story?
Well, there's a lot of history, like I was saying, with the Buffalo Soldiers. They're also just a vital resource as far as being a part of the park at Rouge Park. Part of what Detroit Parks Coalition is doing is, they're trying to really bring people out to the parks, come support the parks, because parks are safe spaces where people of all ages should be able to come and gather. So the Buffalo Soldiers are able to play a huge part in that because they offer something that, at least to my knowledge, is not any other place in the city really where you can just have access to like free horse rides and stuff like that. And as people in the community, it's good for us to be able to have stuff that allows us to step outside of our comfort zone. I've never been on a horse. You
will this weekend.
Yeah, I guess
maybe.
So. But it's stuff like that it brings families and communities together, and that's something that's really important to be able to do, especially a community that's predominantly black and brown. We want to be able to have unity in our community, and this is a way to be able to do that.
I love that.
Absolutely. If you're just joining us, we're chatting with Alex Allen, a.k.a. Lex,
yes.
and Antonio Cosme, who is the land steward manager for the Friends of Rouge Park. And we're talking about the Buffalo Soldiers, the Rouge Park Buffalo Soldiers Blues Freedom Festival coming up. Alex, let's get you into, Antonio, let's get you into the conversation. We already know there are going to be pony rides and other activities. Tell us about what people can expect, Antonio.
You're going to be able to expect a lot of fantastic vendors who are selling goods. There's going to be games, activities on the lawn. There's going to be a lot of food. Marichona is going to be cooking Filipino food there. Okay. And I'll actually be working on some deer hides out there, too.
Now, tell us what that is for people that don't know, because I inquiring minds want to know, Antonio.
Yeah. I think, so I'm also with a group called Black to Land, and, we've been pushing for using the entire part of the deer when you hunt. There's actually a big deer problem in Rouge Park. There's too many deer. They're actually killing some of the flower species in the park. But yeah, just processing and using the hide to make leather. It just kind of seems to fit in with the Western sort of style of the event. We'll also have some photographers on hand, so we're really hoping that people can come in their Western wear. I think a lot of folks, that's like a new thing. Beyonce came out with her, Western song, and we definitely want to make sure that people can represent, and that aspect of the Black sort of Western cowboy vibe is there. So Black Talent is going to be offering a prize for the best outfit. So definitely come dressed to impress with your Western wear.
Yes, this ain't Texas.
I dig
love
that.
It so much. I know. And just like you, Ken, were so interested, I'm interested as well. Antonio, I know that you're the land steward manager. You make sure that the land is tended to. You just talked about the deer. I almost hit a deer the other day driving through Rouge Park. And I make sure I drive through slowly as well, down Spinoza and all the roads. But it definitely almost hit a deer. So can you talk a little bit about the issue there in Rouge Park? Because we only have a little bit of time, but I just want to pivot there. Talk about that and some of the things that you all are doing to kind of help curb the deer population in Rouge Park.
Well, I think there needs to be a broader conversation regionally about doing deer culling.
Okay.
City of Dearborn does a call. Detroit is investigating doing a call. We brought in the USDA in the middle of last year to look at that. Southfield voted down their call really foolishly a couple years ago. So I hope they reverse that opinion, because we have to manage these deer populations. Otherwise, it's going to be all of our vehicles on the line.
I mean, yeah, it scared me really, really straight the other day when I was driving. So just getting back to the park itself, I know that the Friends of Rouge Park is growing. We got a little bit of time here, but it is growing. And we talked beforehand earlier this year about the growth of Friends of Rouge Park, some of the things that we've been able to see and experience as the park is growing, the natural habitat, the wildflowers. I mean, it's been really, really beautiful to see. And you guys are continuing to grow. So you do have a new position that you just opened up, if you want to get into that.
Yeah, we're looking to hire an executive director after 22 years of being run as a volunteer-led organization.
Amazing.
Really initiated by Paul and Sally, who've done a fantastic job stewarding the organization. But they're getting old, they're looking to pass it on. They'd like it to be more substantial. And one thing I really love about them is they hired 2 young people of color to be the first real staff people for the organization. And we're looking for a leader to help guide us in our future for the park. Overseeing grants and applying for funding and all the things that executive directors do. But yeah, we're looking to we're going into a 100-year anniversary for the park itself next year. So it's going to be a big centennial celebration all next year, 100 years of Rouge Park, and we're going to look into this new year with a bigger staff and a more serious approach for us.
My skin is tingling. I can't wait to learn about 100 years of Rouge Park. But before I let both of you go, Lex, 30 seconds or less, can you tell us the rundown of Saturday? What do people need to know? The times?
Yep. All right, so it's going to be at 8886 Losser Road at the Buffalo Soldiers Heritage Association from 1 to 5 p.m. It's going to be free admission for everybody, so just come. Like Antonio said, bring your best Western wear. Free food, lawn games, live music by Big Pete and his band. It's going to be a great time, great event for families and kids and all sorts of things like that.
Alex Allen, a.k.a. Lex, is the program director for Friends of Rouge Park, and Antonio Cosme is the land stewardship manager for Friends of Rouge Park. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening. Ken and I will return tomorrow.